I remember thinking, oh my gosh, like, what's the first thing that happens when you go to a cocktail party and you're holding a glass of wine or a cocktail and somebody comes up to you that you don't know and they say, hi, I'm so and so. What do you do? So I had that moment where I thought, oh my gosh, like, what do I do? What am I going to tell people when they say, what do you do? Well, I wallpapered my pantry last weekend. I don't think they want to know about that. What am I doing? I don't have a big career to talk about. And then also in that same moment, like, do I care? Is this my identity?
Welcome to another special edition of Shift Happens. We call this Talking Shift. Conversations with leaders whose journeys intersect with ours, but whose stories go way beyond Cisco. Today, I'm joined by Rebecca Leach. Rebecca is an executive coach and a consultant who helps leaders in technology-driven organizations navigate growth, change, with confidence, clarity, and connection. She draws on her 25 years in the tech sector, including senior leadership roles at Cisco and AppDynamics. Whether working with first-time leaders or seasoned executives, Rebecca's approach blends empathy and accountability, guiding clients to lead with authenticity, build trust, and drive impactful results. Rebecca, welcome to Talking Shift.
Thanks, Jeff.
Where does this podcast find you today?
I'm at home office in Toronto, Canada.
Exciting. Well, we've known each other for quite a while, and I've been looking forward to this conversation. But I know everyone may not know you quite as well as I do. So before we get going into your journey and what I think will be a really, really powerful story today, maybe give the listeners who don't know you as well a little background on who you are and where you came from.
Oh, wow. Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you, Jeff. It's great to be here. I am a Canadian born and raised, several generations Canadian, and I live in Ontario. I am a single mom. I have an amazing 15-year-old son named Jack who plays baseball and a number of other sports. I've spent my career in tech. I have lots of other passions though. I love interior design. In fact, I have a degree in it. And at one time, I owned an interior design firm, which my ex-husband referred to as a not-for-profit. Um, but definitely have that entrepreneurial spirit. I owned a dog food company at one time as well. So I just, I love to kind of get out there and figure out what else I can be doing with my life, right? So lots of interest on that piece. I also love cars. So big car
I know a
girl.
little bit about that one.
Yeah. Yes, you do. That's right. So yeah, I've always had a passion for cars, for fast cars. And I really enjoy driving my car here in the summer. We don't get a lot of great weather here in Ontario, but we get about 4 or 5 months of decent sun, so the car comes out. Um, what else can I tell you? I don't know. I've got a wonderful circle of friends, and I'm in a really good place in my life right now, and I'm excited to talk to you about that.
No, I love it. I can't wait to jump into the story. Normally, I can draw kind of a line connecting some of the things, but between interior design, dog food, and fast cars, I'm going to work on that over the next 30 minutes or so to connect all that together. But let's jump into the story because I think the whole really the whole idea behind this podcast is to take people in through the eyes of the people that have experienced great change, great evolution in their lives, and really what it felt like in the moment, where they were before that change, and then what's that unexpected growth that you never could have seen when it first happened. And so that's what we're going to get into today, but let's go all the way back and give us a window into Rebecca's life before the
Mm.
shift started.
Yeah, sure. I had the privilege of being part of Cisco at that time for about 17 years. So quite a significant tenure. An amazing company to work for and with. I was leading the Canadian arm of AppDynamics, which was Cisco's first real SaaS acquisition in
Hmm.
2017. So lots of change, lots of disruption. It was a really exciting time. It was a very challenging role for me. I loved it. Had a fantastic team. And I was doing purposeful work. I was mentoring women across the organization. I was developing leaders. There was rhythm in the business. There was, you know, the consistency of forecast calls and, um, customer meetings and QBRs and those types of things. It was a really enjoyable time. It was a really fantastic experience from a career perspective. and a very rewarding and a great learning experience overall.
Yeah, and there's one thing you said, and we're gonna come back to it, my guess is, but this idea of you mentioned consistency, and I think that when we think about what things look like before a major shift or evolution in our lives, right, that the
Mhm.
consistency theme tends to come out, right? Is it's a rhythm that we're in, if you will, and uh, but so give me an idea. How did you define success during
Mm.
that time?
I would say I define success from two lenses. The first would be on a professional side of things. I think success is defined for me in terms of the impact that the team I'm leading is having in the organization, the impact they're having to our customers, to our partners. The happiness meter, how engaged they are. So I think, certainly that was how I defined success in many ways, the culture that we built and so on. On a personal side, I think, for me, success was the progression I'd had in my career, the brand that I had built inside the organization,
Hmm.
inside our partner community and customer community. I was proud of how I turned up each day with emotional regulation and consistency. I think my teams knew what they were going to get, so to speak,
Hmm.
right? Which I think is really important. Especially when we kind of bring it back to that theme around rhythms and consistency. I
Sure.
think, right? Knowing what you're going to get from your leader, and being able to understand and predict that is really important to teams. So I would say that's probably how I would define success from those two lenses, Jeff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes when you go through these stories and you look at what did it look like before the shift, there's typically a rhythm and consistency. But
Mhm.
it sounded like not only did you have a pretty durable definition of success, but you knew what you were proud of. I
Yeah.
guess let me ask one more question. So if you mentioned brand, I'll call it identity. But
Mhm.
just in a couple sentences, what's the identity that if you had to go back
Yeah.
and really call out what's the identity of Rebecca at that point before this shift, what would it have been?
Uh, I was a senior female leader in tech. Uh, there's, that's a very coveted, very unique position to be in this industry. As you know, Jeff, there's not a lot of women. I would say a lot of my identity was built on, where I was in my career, the responsibility that I had for the teams, for the business. I would say, this is probably something that won't surprise a lot of folks, is we tend to include what we do for a living as part of who we are, as part of our identity, whether rightly or wrongly. I mean, I think that's something that, we get into, maybe chat a bit about, because that certainly changed for me. But I think at that time, very much, I was very proud of the role I had, of the organization that I got to be a part of the teams that I led. And that was certainly a good chunk of my identity. Now, certainly another part of my identity was, being a mom and being very proud of the accomplishments that my son has had, and that family piece and so on, and some of the personal accomplishments that I've made in my life as well. But yeah, I would say certainly, being one of very few female leaders in the industry. I think there's when you get into senior level roles globally, I think women have about maybe 10 to 15% of those roles. So certainly something that I was proud of. And also in that sort of reality of recognizing that I wasn't in the majority. And so looking to bring other women along, right, and lift them
Yeah.
up, and really focusing on that part as a really critical part of the journey for me.
Yeah, and I do know that about you is, on one hand, there's this unique kind of unicorn aspect of being a senior female leader in technology. But I know
Hmm.
you well enough to know that it wasn't a badge that you wanted just for yourself. You wanted to
No.
expand it. But I guess it leads me to maybe the next question. Were there any assumptions during that time as country manager for AppD for all of Canada, really big role, big team that you're leading? What were some of the assumptions that maybe you didn't even know you were making at that point?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It's a bit of a tricky one, to be honest. The assumptions that I didn't know. I think I assumed one thing I led with pretty consistently as an assumption, probably part of my leadership style, was that we always wanted to try and be disruptive, but we wanted to avoid being destructive. And that was something I would always share with the teams in terms of, when we were in the business that we were in was very new. And we like to break things. I would often say, let's go break
Mhm.
stuff. Let's put it back together. Let's take the learnings and go forward. But let's never be destructive, right? Like let's not change for the sake of changing things. I don't subscribe to that. And so I think that was probably a fair assumption. The other assumption that I like to make and like to share with others is that, you know, stripping as much as you can the hierarchy from organizations is a really healthy thing to do. And one of the ways that we can do that is to recognize that sometimes the most valuable people in the room are not the ones with the biggest titles, but they're the ones with the most information. And so I think that was an important assumption in my leadership and how I worked with others and just the standards that I held myself accountable to as well in that journey. So I don't know if that answers the question, if
It
that's
it does, and so I would say challenge you. I don't think it's as much of a challenge as it is maybe a sharing a little bit of a self journey with
yeah.
me as well. Is I think throughout my career, I made the assumption really of two things. One, that things kind of always moved up and to the right. That if you kept doing well and you kept, exceeding, that
Yeah.
you would just keep moving up and getting more responsibility and a larger title. And even though those things didn't matter, at least in my world, it felt like that. Well, that's exactly how it should go, right? And then you realize that that's not always the case, right? And so I think that's an assumption, at least that I've made. I would love to get your response to that. And then the second assumption for me, and you touched on it and you learned it, and this doesn't surprise me, but you learned it way quicker than I did, is I also like to be disruptive. And I always say I like to throw toys out in the middle of the floor and then let's figure out how they go back in the right way and don't assume that they were already in the perfect spot. But the thing that I was, the thing that I've learned the hard way is not everybody likes to be disrupted at the same pace that I like to
No.
disrupt. And so maybe share, does anything resonate with the up and to the right? Was that is that something that you knew that it didn't always work like that, or is that something that maybe you look back and know now?
I would say that's something I would look back and know now, but I didn't have that exact experience. I think to
Yeah.
your point, we generally feel like if we're doing the right things, if we're recognized by the right folks, if we're leaning in the right meetings and all those types of important things to do, that we will eventually go up and to the right. What I found in my career was that I often would kind of come up and come across and then come up and come across
Mm,
and that was something that I shared with a lot of other folks who had this impression that you would just continuously kind of always be going up. And I
sure.
think that, at one point in my career, I wanted to move from operations and marketing in the channel into a sales role. And so I actually had to take a demotion, which in the moment felt really, not very intuitive for my career progression, but it was something that was necessary because, I needed to go and figure out what that world was like, improve myself on that side of the fence, so to speak, and build up that reputation, show that I could do that work in order to continue to progress. So I would say, up and to the right, yes, generally. Um, and I think if we're doing the right things and we're leaning in and we're learning, that is a fair assumption to make. Does it happen for everybody? Not necessarily. And sometimes it's intentional. And I think
Yeah.
that's, where the shift happens, right?
100%, and you said it beautifully. The way that I tend to think about it is, and even when I'm coaching others, is sometimes you have to take a step sideways to get a better view of where you actually want to go. And you can't get that view if you're always going up and to the right, right? Like sometimes lateral, sometimes stepping back
Yeah.
is what you need to get a different perspective. Well, thanks for sharing. And it's really clear, but let's go to the moment that changed and the shift that really opened up the door to who you are now. But I bet my guess is at that moment it probably didn't feel like that door was open up. So take us into the moment that things shifted for you, Rebecca.
Hmm. Uh, It was decision time. It was that moment where I knew that my career at Cisco was going to either end or change in a significant way. So the company was going through a pretty significant reorganization around the go-to-market strategy. And I was faced with the very harsh reality that Canada, as I knew it and was leading it, as a country model, as an organization, was going to be changing, was going to be going away, and moving into a different model, a different geographic kind of approach around managing multiple countries and a different go-to-market through partners, etc. And so I'd had a few conversations with some of the executive teams at AppDynamics, and it was that decision time, right? It was, okay, do I stay or do I go? I was given a choice to stay in a slightly different capacity. And I was looking at that time at 19 years on the books with Cisco. I'm kind of thinking in
Hmm.
that moment, I've been with this organization for so long, and it's been such a wonderful ride. I've had so many careers inside of one company. Is this is an inflection point? Is this the time that I decide to either stay and possibly stay for another 10 years and maybe sunset out in my career at Cisco? Or do I decide to step away, to step out? And to what? I have no idea, right? That was
Wow.
a very big moment to say, do I step away from, and I don't want to say comfort in the sense that it was a comfortable role. It wasn't. It was challenging, and there was a lot of rigor and so on. But I think when you've been in corporate environments for 25 years, there's a certain comfort around understanding that a paycheck will come every 2 weeks, understanding that
Sure.
a benefits plan may be in place, that you have that rhythm that we talked about, right? Understanding kind of what your days and weeks will look like, travel, etc., customer meetings, and so on. Stepping into something that had none of that, promised nothing. That was the moment, that shift for me where I had to take a pause and really figure out what I wanted to do next.
And as I listen to it, these always sound great when you're just talking about it, but in that moment, there's a couple things that really jump out to me. One, you say stepping into. The
Hmm.
reality was, unless there's more to the story than I think I know, you weren't stepping into anything concrete. It
No, I
was
was
you were stepping into you, right? Like that was really what was happening. Except if we go back to the identity piece,
hmm
a big piece of this, and rightly so at that point,
hmm
was being one of a very few senior female leaders in the technology industry. And so while you're stepping into an unknown, and that's scary and exciting, and all of the things that come with it, there's also the piece where your identity gets challenged a bit as well. Tell me a
hmm
little bit about that.
hmm Yeah, I was stepping into ambiguity. I was stepping into
Mm.
risk. Um, and with that came, to your point, some of the identity, not, I don't say identity crisis, but certainly that moment where you you think, "Oh, who will I become?
Sure.
What's next?" Right? I know what I've been and where I've gone and the experiences I've had, but what's next for me and where am I going? Um, and it's interesting. I had a lot of quiet excitement about what was to come. I really didn't know where I was going at that point. I knew I had options because I'd had a great career and I had a fantastic
Sure.
network and all that kind of stuff. But when you talk about the identity, let's talk about that for a minute because I have kind of an interesting story around that. I One of my really close friends was having a birthday, and she was having like 75 people at this party. And I was going to the party, and I remember thinking, "Oh my gosh, like what's the first thing that happens when you go to a cocktail party and you're holding a glass of wine or a cocktail and somebody comes up to you that you don't know and they say, 'Hi, I'm so and so.' What's the first question
Yeah.
that they ask you? What
Yeah,
do
what
you
do you
do?
do?
What do you do?"
Exactly.
So I had that moment where I thought, "Oh my gosh, like what do I do? What am I going to tell people when they say, 'What do you do?'" Well, I wallpapered my pantry last weekend. I don't think they want to know about that. What am I doing? I don't have a big career to talk about. I've been out on my own for a couple of months. I've been interviewing for roles that felt comfortable, country leader roles or, a chief operating officer role, like those types of things that felt like the next logical step for me because that was kind of where I figured I would go as I would stay the
Yeah.
course. But that's not what I'm doing. And that's not necessarily in that moment who I am. So it was that moment of, leading up to that party and also lots of other social conversations and stuff of kind of having that self-reflection about saying like, what do I want to be able to say? What do I want to be able to go do? What matters to me?
Hmm.
And then also in that same moment, like, do I care? How much of this do I really care about? Like, is this my identity or is my identity actually the fact that I'm a very strong, smart, confident woman who's a great mom and has this amazing circle of friends and has a fantastic network and all this great experience from Cisco? Like,
Yes.
that's who I am. Right. And I'm no longer defined by this executive role that I held for many years at an amazing organization. And that shift was tough because when you're putting away the title and that kind of stuff, you've got to fill that void with something.
And it's such a it's such a simple example, Rebecca, but it's filled with so much. And I'll go back to used ambiguity. One of my favorite phrases or ways to think about this is there is incredible power in allowing tension and ambiguity to live in the same space.
Yes.
It's not fun. There's nothing comfortable about it, but the tension of I'm going to a party
Mhm.
and what do I say when I know they're going to ask this question, and the ambiguity of how do I answer that question?
Right.
Is it about what I do or is it about who I am? And and I think that's the beautiful part about that, but it's also again another moment that forced you to think a little bit differently, right? And to go
Yes.
deeper and I guess if we were to put a timeline on it between maybe the the loss, because there's no other way to describe it, right? There's a loss and a grieving component to any
Yes.
time something like that happens, right? And then there's the other side of exhilaration of, okay, now I get to find out about me and I get to go do what I want to do and I'll create the next chapter.
Yeah.
Walk me through that timeline. Is it
Mm.
couple days, I'm ready to go? Is it a couple months? Like, hey, yeah, I'm guessing it may not have been a couple days, but maybe walk me through that timeline a little bit.
Yeah, it's sort of the shredding, the unraveling of, the detoxing of all of those years of corporate rhythm and identity. And it does take time. And it was definitely a bit of a journey for me. I would say it was a few months for sure.
Okay.
Of coming out of Cisco and coming out of those rhythms and having mornings where I had time for a second coffee because I wasn't racing to a meeting, and sort of enjoying that.
Second coffee.
I
What's
know.
that about? I mean, like,
And enjoying that new pace that I controlled and actually taking control back, not being sort of batted around between WebEx meetings and strategy sessions and customer calls and so on. Having that ownership back. Now, ownership, absolutely. Control, absolutely. But tons of ambiguity.
oh,
Tons of like a lack of structure. I had so much structure in my day, as you know, right? So that was a big shift. And I would say, letting go of that structure and kind of sitting in that pit of risk, not necessarily knowing what was going to happen, that took some time to get through, to answer your question. That was a couple of months.
and
Um,
did you ever find yourself joining for a forecast call that you weren't on anymore? Like, yeah.
yeah, hi, I'm back. Yeah, how are you doing? Um, it's funny, I didn't miss that piece. I found I felt the days quite well. And I think because I do have a lot of interest outside of what I was doing at Cisco, it was easy to fill the days and it was easy to um start to make the list and actually get through the list of all those things you said you'd do if it rained on the weekend.
Hmm.
Right? So it's great to feel that productivity. And I think that that is so important because I guarantee you there's so many of us out there that are working through the day, and at the, when the night comes and you're sort of sitting down and you think, oh, I really still need to reorganize that closet, or I really wanted to get to the garage this weekend.
Mhm.
When you get the chance to do it, it is an unbelievable feeling of productivity, and of completion. And that for me was lacking because I was just running all the time. And so to slow down and to start to do some of those things that were on the list and had been on the list for quite some time was a really great feeling. It was quite cathartic, actually. And that was part of the journey for me, was coming back to some of the things that I wanted to do and that were important to me, spending time with family that I hadn't spent time with, being more present at my son's baseball games, things like that, because I had a clearer head because of this shift. Now, part of my head was also saying, okay, what's next? Right. So don't
Yeah.
get too comfortable. What's next? What are we doing? Right. This
It
is
it
not,
is it's the and that's what I wanted to jump in just for a second
yeah.
because I think, again, really what we wanna do is bring to life some of these powerful stories so other people that may not be as far along in their timeline can
Yeah.
can recognize or see themselves in your story, and so there's the loss and the grief, and then there's a bit of exhilaration and like, "Oh my gosh, everything that I did never had time to do, I have time to do."
Hmm.
And there's something in the back of your mind saying, "Okay, that's great, but at some point all the projects are done,
Right.
and what's
Okay.
next? Why am I not as existential as why am I here, but what's my bigger purpose outside of projects?" And I know as you formed that direction and that you didn't fully understand where it was going. I'm a big believer that anytime there's significant shifts and you're on this journey, there are
Mm.
heroes that appear
Yes.
that you would never expect. And you
Right.
had one, I believe it was your executive assistant in your previous role. Tell me about how that person emerged during this and time to help you form kind of where you may go next.
This was such a pivotal moment for me because, as I mentioned, I was going through this sort of, I guess, focus on what I was going to do next that felt very similar to what I had done. So I was interviewing for roles that felt familiar, that felt like the right thing, the natural progression for my career. And one day my phone rang and it was my executive assistant who had left the company about 4, 5 months before I had left.
Hmm.
And she had gone to work for a startup in the UK, a SaaS company. And she called me out of the blue. She knew what had happened with Cisco and that I was out kind of figuring out what was going to be next. And she called me and she said, "Hey, Rebecca, we're looking. I'm working for this COO and the co-founder of the company, and he's fantastic. And we're looking for an executive coach." And I said, "Okay, yeah, I can help you find somebody, no problem." And she sort of paused and looked at me and she said, "No, no, no. Like I'm talking about you." And it was one of those moments where somebody sees something in you that you didn't see in yourself.
Hmm.
And it was that moment of, well, I'm not an executive. I'm not a coach. And she said, oh, but you are. When you think about all the work you've done over the years at Cisco with, the mentoring circles and coaching women and mentoring people through the organization, all the leaders that you've developed, all those times when you took somebody under your arm and you said, let me help you with this, or, maybe there's a better way to do this. She said, "Those moments I watched, and I think that this might be something you should think about." And she stopped me in my tracks because I
Hmm.
thought, "What?" I love that. And when I started to peel back the layers, and this might come as a surprise, but when I started to peel back the layers of all the things I really enjoyed at Cisco, it wasn't the forecast calls. It was
Shocker.
actually, yeah. It wasn't the QBRs, building slides till midnight. It was those moments where, I could help somebody to show up differently, where I could help somebody to find their courage or find their voice. Um, those were the most rewarding moments, as they are as leaders. And I thought, oh my gosh, imagine a career that would allow me to spend time doing something that was such a passion for me, to integrate a skill that I had to continue to cultivate that skill and have it also align with my belief system. Like, that's your superpower. That's your
That
magic.
that I mean, it's fascinating because as you described before the shift, like if we had a word cloud everything you just said would have been at the center of that word cloud, except it was in a tech industry role as a leader, and there was all the stuff that wraps around it. But
Mhm.
the red thread was always your desire to coach and mentor and help people be better versions of themselves. And I find it fascinating. And it's so consistent that other people see those qualities sometimes more than we do because we're too
Yes.
close to it. And
Mhm.
she
Mhm.
helped you identify your
Mhm.
superpower. But more importantly, next party you go to, I think if somebody's, what do you do? Like that's a different question at that point, right? Like you empower people and you help them become better versions of themselves. And that led you into
Mhm.
really what you're becoming today. And I use becoming because I know we've talked enough to know that, you know, you're not there. I'm not there, right? We're still becoming, which is such a fun place to be. And
Mhm.
it's fascinating. So maybe
Mhm.
tell me a little bit now after be just being more aware and being made aware of that superpower, what are you doing today? Like, how did you use that insight to take you to where you are now?
Yeah. And this is my favorite part of the story. This is what I call the breath out,
Mm,
you know? Yeah, I took her seriously. I said, "You know what? Okay. That I would love to meet with this executive. He's flying into Toronto from the UK next week. Let's do it." And that was that moment of, courageous curiosity, right? And I met with him and we hit it off and we talked about the business and the strategy and the stresses under, the pressures that they were under and all the challenges they were having. And um, he hired me on the spot and he's actually still my
wow.
client. They were my very first client. They're still my client. And I, in that moment, thought, okay, I'm going to do this. And then very shortly after that, I thought, okay, I'm going to do this right. So I'm going to go get the education because lots of leaders can be coaches, but there's actually some strategy and modeling that goes behind what to do and what not to do when you're trying to help people through their careers and so on. It's not just about sitting and giving a lot of advice to people. It's actually the opposite. So I went back to school and I did the certifications. And while I was sort of doing the coaching and having this first experience with this organization in the UK, and then the rest, as they say, starts to become part of the history, right? Part of the book that you're writing, which is, fast forward 2.5 years, I have an organization that I've started called Growth Road Leadership. I have a website launching next week. I have several
Exciting.
clients. It's just wild. It's just gone. And it's one of those things where I wake up in the morning and I truly want to do the work and I love the work. And it is incredibly rewarding. It is the most rewarding work I have ever done. And it is rewarding because I feel like I'm actually helping people and making a difference. And that is just unparalleled.
And as I think about your journey, sometimes, and I don't sense this actually with you, but sometimes I think people look at the before this shift and want to discard most of that, right? And say, I'm becoming something new. But the reality is most of the time, there are
Mhm.
things that we pull through
Oh,
that remain with us. And there's a lot of, I guess, more soft skills, but one hard skill that I just picked up on was you knew what you wanted to do. You knew you had the ability to do it, but unless you put a framework and systems in place and education to help you do it,
mhm.
that goes back to your previous roles, understanding that you needed to get
Yes,
the education and enable yourself. But what's unique, I think, for you and what I love about you is you were ready to go back to be a beginner again. Like you
absolutely.
didn't mind being a beginner again.
Yeah, it's really ego out, Jeff. I don't think there's a lot of place for ego in business. And I think that, for me, it was really a reflection time. It was, do I have what it takes to do this? Am I good enough to do it? Because it's really important work. And yeah, so absolutely, it was stepping back. It was stripping back the layers. And it wasn't coming in as a former Cisco executive. It was coming in as somebody who really wanted to figure out how to do this work and do it right and learn it and really own it. Um, yeah, starting from scratch, but bringing all of those experiences with me. So I always say we're a product of one thing, and that's our experiences. And so to your
Yep.
point, that thread, I love that analogy, that thread. all of the things I had learned, the experiences, the challenges, the failures, the risks, all those things, they were all part of who I was showing up in that moment, starting this new business, right? There was risk, there was ambiguity, there was a lack of structure, and I was trying to find those rhythms again in a different way. But to your point, it is important to rebuild that structure. Even though it was an entirely different career choice, it was still, yeah, it was still the rhythms are needed, right?
I can see it in your body language. I can see it in your smile. Like
Yeah.
it's so fun to see this. And
Mhm.
so as we were preparing and talking before this, one of the things that stuck out is this, again, big title, country manager, AppD Canada. And yet, I think you have a weekly roundtable with CEOs that come in and that you work with, right? And that you coach. And going from country manager, which sounds like a big role, to helping CEOs better themselves, their entire organizations. Like,
Yeah.
that's an incredible journey. But was there one moment? It's one thing to know you can do it. That's got to be there. But I've always found there's a little bit of the external validation that just reinforces, yeah, I can do this. Was there a moment as you started this journey where you really knew, based off of an engagement with a client or an interaction, that yeah, I got this?
Yes. Yeah. One of my earlier clients early on in 2023, I had a female vice president, and I think it was maybe 4 or 5 sessions in, she said to me, thank you. Like I, this is really quite a privilege for me to have learned as much and changed as much and understand as much about how I was showing up and how I was showing up for my teams, and to be able to actually have this thought partner to help me make some tweaks and changes so that I can be a better, stronger leader. And I'm getting feedback from my teams. They're telling me it's working. They don't necessarily know, obviously, the intricacies and the confidentiality and the things that we're talking about, but they are seeing the changes that I'm implementing, and they are applauding the changes, and they are really, it's resonating, and it's having a really positive impact on the team that I'm leading. And as I said to you earlier, that's a definition of success for me, right?
That makes my heart so happy. That like fills the soul to know that the
Yeah.
ripple that you start with that engagement
Yeah.
goes far and wide, and it
Yeah.
impacts that, not only that person but the other people in their organization. And there's not a I can't imagine a much more satisfying or fulfilling moment than that. And
Mm.
but we'll go back to, I know you, and I know you're not done. You're not a
No.
finished, you're
Uh,
not a finished project here. So
no.
what version of you are you most proud of today? And where are you still, what's an area you still are looking to continue to grow and explore and be curious?
Great question. I think, self-awareness is really important. I've always said I think it's a really important trait for leaders, for all people. So I try to be really aware, and part of that is understanding where the gaps are. There's a constant need for improvement, for learning. I'm very curious. So I'm constantly wanting to show up better tomorrow than I did today, for myself, for my son, for my friends, for my clients. So I think, what's next? What's the journey look like? Um, I just want to be better. I just want to continue
Mm,
to grow, to be a much more intense listener, to be a much more engaged thought partner, um, a better friend, a better, parent. I mean, I think it's the whole person, right?
yeah.
So for me, it's not just how I want to be at Growth Road, but it's also the person that I am continuing to become, right? So it's a journey. It's
Yeah.
books, it's podcasts like this, it's connections like the one you and I have. It's learning from friends, it's putting yourself out there. It's recognizing that growth and comfort do not coexist, and
Yeah.
feeling a little uncomfortable at times and knowing it's okay because you're probably making some pretty good progress. And recognizing that old saying, the old adage we've said for years, but it's so important, and that is progress over perfection, right? Giving yourself some grace because not all days are going to be fantastic days. That's okay. Um, but just taking a second chance and taking a look around, and yeah, that's what's next for me. It's just
I love
continuous.
it. It just feels like a story of being authentic to who you are. It feels like a story of being willing to continue to be curious, but at the same time be courageous and just step into the unknown, because most of the time that's where you find the best version of you, right? And it reminds me of something that I love to think about is many times we should go in before we go out to figure things out. And you mentioned it with being self-aware and the introspective part of being willing to go in before we go out. And there's times for each, but it just I love
Mm.
the hope and the beauty of the journey. And I'll just finish with this. And each conversation we end with this one, with this question, and that's, you know, if you're talking to someone, and you are to lots of people that may just be in the beginning of a similar journey or shift, not what's the most profound piece of advice you could give them, but what's one small piece of advice or one small step they could take today that will move them closer to becoming who they are really meant to be?
I think that when you find yourself in a position like I was in, where you're in that shift, you're in that moment where something is changing, whether it's in your control, because some people will actually choose those shift moments. They'll switch jobs and they'll move on, or they'll, leave a marriage or leave a friendship, or there's always those moments of
Hmm.
inflection where there's change. And I think the most important thing to do, and this is from my own learning, is to take a pause, because I think what happens inevitably is we're all going so fast all the time. We're always making decisions. And, in the sense of losing a job, which is a great example, because that's where I've come from, where I was sort of, forced to make that shift in my life. A lot of people will just jump into another job very quickly, right? Well, gotta have a job, we gotta go. Okay, this looks good. Next thing you know, you're into the next job. That one didn't work. Next job. And there becomes this cycle. And I've seen it with clients, I've seen it with friends. So I think my advice in that moment, it's a tiny little thing, a shift, but is to take a pause and look around and actually figure out, like we talked about earlier, what your passion is, what your skill set and strengths are, and align those with your belief system and your values. And if you can figure out what that looks like, that little Venn diagram, that part in the middle, that mushy middle is actually where the magic
Hmm.
is. And so I think taking the time, right? Just look at yourself, figure out what that magic looks like in the middle. That's superpower. That's where
I
you'll find
love the little
that's
pause. I don't know if there's
yeah,
anything more powerful than the awareness just to pause.
yeah,
And even if you have a chance to get a promotion, pause. Does that align with where I want to go? Different job, new career, just pause for a second. Really powerful advice. Everyone can do it because it's in everyone's control to pause just for a second. Well, I know I will pause after this, Rebecca, and reflect. I've learned so much during this conversation. You inspire me to think about things
thank
differently, and I'm excited. So, Rebecca, before we close, do me a favor, share with the audience, where can they find you? I think you've got a website that's up and running now. Share a little bit with the audience.
I'd love to. Thanks, Jeff. The website is growthroad.ca. And I've just launched it. I'm really proud of it. It's really exciting to have a place for my clients to come, for potential clients to read a little bit about what the coaching practice is that I offer, the different services. So you'll find me there, growthroad.ca, and I look forward to inviting everyone to come visit the site and drop me a note. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Rebecca. Growthroad.ca. Well, I
Yeah.
would encourage anyone who's looking for a chance to find the better, more authentic version of themselves and continue to grow, reach out to Rebecca at growthroad.ca. Rebecca, I can't tell you how grateful I am for you taking the time to come on the show. But more importantly, my hope is that your story impacts others and helps them find that version and find the joy and the happiness and the fulfillment that I see in your face today. So look forward to connecting soon, Rebecca. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jeff. This was fantastic.
What stayed with me in this conversation with Rebecca is how quiet her shift really was. The title changed, the rhythm stopped, and yet she had to answer a question many of us avoid. Who am I without the role? Instead of rushing into the next thing, she paused. She got curious, and she allowed someone else in her network to help her see her superpower. That kind of courage doesn't always look bold. Sometimes it just looks honest. And that's a wrap on this episode of Shift Happens. Remember, change doesn't wait, and neither should you. So take what you've learned, put it into action, and together, let's go make shift happen.